Good morning. Let's try that again. Good morning. Well, welcome everyone to Good Food Conference 2023. The theme of this Good Food Conference is the path to 2030, as you can see behind me, focused on how alternative proteins can be solutions to critical challenges facing the world. We do so eyes wide open about the scale of the challenge in front of us, how we feed 10 billion people in a world where meat demand is soaring, how we build a more sustainable and just food system for people, the planet, and animals. And we are so thrilled to be joined by all the people in this room who are contributing to that essential mission day in and day out in all the myriad ways you do so. But before we look forward to 2030, we thought this was a moment to reflect and take stock on how we got to this moment when cultivated meat went from science fiction a little over a decade ago to now being available at a butchery in Singapore, a restaurant in DC, and right here in San Francisco. About how the plant-based sector is over $8 billion in the US alone, about how hundreds of companies and innovators and investors are seeking to jump into the space, and governments around the world have now invested a cumulative over $1 billion in R&D and support for this sector, while also beginning to embed alternative proteins in their national strategies for food security, for the bioeconomy, for sustainability, for biodiversity, and so much more. You know, they say that progress comes slowly and then all at once. And standing here in California, we are seeing that play out with EVs, with energy, with so many other sectors. And all of us are engaged in the work of getting closer and closer to that tipping point, towards that moment when we finally build towards a world where all proteins are no longer alternative. And while we'll have a few folks on the stage this morning to recognize, the reality is every single person in this room, all your work over the past decade, advancing the science, the policy, the market momentum of alternative proteins, is what's gotten here to this moment. The hours spent burning the midnight oil in a lab trying to get that critical breakthrough. The endless negotiations over a comma in some regulatory document that could pave the way towards a level regulatory playing field for all proteins, or could pave the way for billions of dollars in investment in the sector. The amount of time on marketing and sales calls endlessly trying to advance your company's effort to get a product to market. All that work has contributed to where we are and how we get to 2030. So while we have a few folks on the stage today, the reality is every single person in this room, every single person joining us virtually deserves to be on a stage just like this one. So with that, it's my pleasure to cede the floor to three of my colleagues at GFI who work on our three programmatic areas: policy, science and technology, and corporate engagement, to kick off GFC 2023 by highlighting a few extraordinary champions who've gotten us to this place in the ecosystem. Jessica Almy, GFI's Senior Vice President of Policy, is going to kick us off by highlighting a trio of exceptional leaders who've advanced all proteins in the public sector. So with that, Jessica.
Thank you all for joining the Good Food Conference. You're here because you care about alternative proteins. Some of us are motivated by the promise of alternative proteins to free up land and water, bringing back wild spaces and reducing climate emissions. Others see these foods as important tools to make our supply chains more resilient to erratic weather and disease outbreaks. Still others see how alternative proteins can diversify agriculture, create jobs, and maximize consumer choice in the supermarket. Key to realizing each of these benefits is ensuring consumer uptake. Right now, alternative proteins comprise only a tiny proportion of the overall meat market. It's in all of our interests to drive advancements in alternative proteins to provide more tasty options to consumers at lower prices. Policy can help make it happen. Policy can fix things. It's easy to go through your day-to-day experience without noticing the effects of policy. I walk to work. The sidewalks I walk on are paid by the city and maintained by them. I cross the street, and I'm generally safe. It is Washington, D.C., thanks to to laws that govern driving. The air I breathe is free from excessive pollution, thanks to the Federal Clean Air Act, and also state forestry policies that are in effect hundreds of miles away. I could go on, but you get the picture. For most of us, policy is the backdrop to our lives. For my team at GFI, it's our bread and butter. Industrial policy determines what goods are available to us, at what they cost, and where they're made and by whom. Agricultural policy influences the foods that we can buy in the supermarket and how much of our paycheck it costs to feed our family. The Biden administration and Congress have put a lot of money into building American industry. Take semiconductors, for example, to provide American jobs and to preserve American independence in the global economy. They're also increasingly turning their attention to the bioeconomy, a broad term for economic activity using biotechnology and biomass in the production of food and other goods. But it's not a Democrat issue. The Trump administration also prioritized the bioeconomy. Much of the global know-how for the alternative protein sector is here in the United States, and we have good reason to keep it that way. Here's how policy can help. To get us to a future where alternative proteins are plentiful, readily accessible, and affordable, policymakers need to do three things. First, they need to invest in alternative protein research. Second, they need to develop the workforce for alternative proteins. Here in coastal cities like San Francisco, yes, and also in rural communities where opportunities can be scarce. And third, they need to ensure that all the advantages that are available to traditional agriculture are accessible to this industry to create a level playing field. We are here this morning to recognize the policymakers who are leading the way on these issues. These are the people who care how the metaphorical sausage is made in Capitol Hill because they care about how the literal sausage is made in Eustis, Nebraska, Elgin, Texas, and hundreds of other communities across the country. I'm delighted first to recognize Representative Rosa DeLauro of Connecticut. In her previous role as the United States House Appropriations Chair, and in her current role as ranking member of the committee, Representative DeLauro has championed alternative proteins as a critical part to addressing societal issues alongside regenerative agriculture. Her tenacity has resulted in millions of dollars of funding for alternative protein research in the United States Department of Agriculture. When I think of Representative DeLauro, I'm reminded of how far we've come. When I started working on these issues 6.5 years ago, we were thrilled to have alternative proteins be a footnote in a government report. Now Representative DeLauro and her colleagues are directing significant funding to USDA labs across the country that are finding answers to critical questions facing the industry, such as how to improve the texture and nutrition of plant-based meat, and how to use machine learning and artificial intelligence to accelerate development of new crop feedstocks for alternative protein production. Please join me in recognizing Representative DeLauro, who sends along her regards by video.
Hello, everyone. It's an honor to be joining you this morning. I would like to start by welcoming all of you to the Good Food Conference 2023, Path to 2030. To those joining in San Francisco and those joining us online, thank you for attending this essential conference on advancing alternative proteins, a topic of great importance to me. I also want to express my sincere gratitude to the Good Food Institute for hosting the conference. Alternative proteins can provide a market-based solution to several of our most pressing issues by meeting growing demand while reducing our environmental and climate impact. increasing the resiliency of our food system, and providing public health benefits, whether that's reducing the risks of antibiotic resistance, zoonotic diseases, or foodborne illness. When I was chair of the House Committee on Appropriations, I recognized alternative proteins as a key agricultural research priority. I encouraged the USDA to pursue parity in research funding for alternative proteins relative to the animal-based protein research as a means of combating climate change and addressing agricultural emissions while achieving food system resilience. I was proud to successfully direct several $1 million in funding for alternative protein research through the Agricultural Research Service. We recognized that public funding for additional research was crucial for the success of this nascent yet game-changing form of agriculture. And I was pleased to see the USDA fund the creation of the National Institute for Cellular Agriculture at Tufts University, the nation's first cultivated protein research facility, and an important advancement in research and science for the industry. I'm continuing to champion alternative protein research in our current Congress and am committed to seeing the sector's success. I have been proud to fight for government investment in alternative proteins because in a lot of ways, the success of the alternative protein sector will determine the success of our country in meeting our most critical challenges. Whether we successfully meet our climate goals, our food security goals, our national security goals, and our environmental justice goals as a nation depends largely on the success of this very industry. The U.S. must be a leader in the alternative protein sector, and we cannot miss the opportunity. We have always led the way with scientific innovation and should continue to do so now. Not only can we reduce our environmental footprint and improve the security and sustainability of our food system by supporting alternative protein innovation, we can also spur economic growth and create jobs for many Americans. If we can get these products to scale as affordable, nutritious options for households and communities, we can also respond to our nation's hunger crisis, which currently affects more than 30 million Americans, or 1 in 10 households. As I mentioned at the historic White House Conference on Hunger, Nutrition, and Health last year, we need to increase access to plant-based foods everywhere and increase alternative protein research as a mechanism for combating hunger. As a nation, we have already made strides towards success, and I am thrilled with our progress thus far. But there is still much work to be done, especially as it relates to the scale of investments required for the alternative protein industry to thrive and offer affordable products with great taste across the board. We must act now to expand our efforts and commitment to transforming our food system for the better. I am very excited to be a part of this game-changing conference. It is great to see so many folks gathered here today: scientists, entrepreneurs, investors, policymakers, and corporate leaders to achieve our collective mission to mainstream alternative proteins across our food system. Thank you for being a part of this year's Good Food Conference. I look forward to continue to collaborate with the Good Food Institute and others here on this important effort. It is time to double down on building a sustainable, secure, and just food future. Thank you all very much.
I'm delighted next to recognize Deputy Undersecretary Sonnabeg. She served the U.S. Department of Agriculture under 2 presidential administrations. In between, she was Chief of Staff of an international nonprofit organization you may have heard of, the Good Food Institute. Under her leadership as Deputy Undersecretary, Research, Education, and Economics, that's the science enterprise at USDA, is focused on increased support for underserved communities and strengthening partnerships with minority-serving institutions, advancing precision nutrition, and positioning agricultural transformation to fight the climate crisis. Deputy Undersecretary Begg has played a critical role in developing USDA's bold goals to use biotechnology and biomanufacturing to advance societal objectives under an executive order signed by President Biden. These bold goals recognize that food innovation can boost both dairy and cultivated protein companies, sustainably expanding the range of available protein options. They explicitly called for research in the structural design and food architecture of alternative proteins and recognized the importance of precision fermentation to produce high-volume, low-cost proteins and fats. Under her leadership, USDA is beginning to make serious investments in alternative proteins to grow and support the entire sector. Thank you. Let us recognize Deputy Undersecretary Sana Begg. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you so much, Jessica, for those kind words. I don't think I have anything left to say. But in all seriousness, I'm truly honored and grateful and a little bit astonished to be recognized as a champion in a field filled with champions like the incredible Mark Post, whose contributions to this field have been revolutionary. For me, creating a truly nourishing, resilient, and equitable food system is my life's mission. And democratizing access to sustainable and healthy proteins is central to this goal. And while I'm proud to stand alongside the other champions today, I want to be clear that I'm here representing an entire community of public servants across the agriculture, climate, and public health realms, working together to promote sustainable protein innovation. And the Good Food Conference unites leaders who I believe are aligned in this mission and are similarly optimistic that we will succeed in transforming our global food systems from the middle out and the bottom up. And it's events like this that showcase the boundless potential that emerging sectors like this one have, and that inspire clearly public officials like me and Congresswoman DeLauro to listen, to learn, and to respond to your needs. And of course, to take the stage today at a conference that I once helped organize is really a full circle moment. But I'm really not here to talk about me and the small role that I play, but to share, similarly to what Ilya had mentioned, that you are the reason that the public sector has begun to embrace the power and the potential of alternative proteins as a key tool in our toolbox to fight our global climate and hunger crises. And it is all of you, our scientists and researchers, our industry and community leaders, our students and our change makers that motivate us to push the boundaries of climate-smart agricultural innovation and deployment. And your work is critically important because we are at a pivotal moment in history. Our world is changing. We're faced with tremendous challenges beyond climate and hunger, to include biodiversity loss, major public health threats, and rapidly emerging pests and diseases. And across food and agriculture, the COVID-19 pandemic exposed alarming vulnerabilities and bottlenecks in our domestic and global supply chains. It exposed the risks and dangers created by many of today's production systems, which value hyper-efficiency over competition, over resiliency, and over safety. COVID also underscored how agricultural policy in the United States has long been focused on get big or get out, resulting in the acceleration of consolidation. But thankfully, USDA, under the leadership of President Biden and Secretary Vilsack, have been taking sweeping action to tackle structural competition issues and to create fairer, safer, and more resilient agricultural markets. And we believe that one of our sharpest strategies to unlocking this vision is by advancing biotechnology and biomanufacturing. These tools allow us to both create additional revenue streams for producers and to keep wealth in rural communities where it is created. And alternative protein development is one of the focal areas of President Biden's executive order to advance biotechnology and biomanufacturing. He specifically calls on USDA to determine how to use these tools to advance food and agriculture innovation, including by cultivating alternative food sources listed specifically in the EO. And in response, as Jessica mentioned, USDA partnered with the White House to release our Food and Ag Bold Goals report this spring. In it, we outline the goal that in 5 years, we will demonstrate viable pathways to produce protein for food consumption, including from biomass, from waste, from CO2, that achieve greater than 50% life cycle greenhouse gas emissions reduction and cost parity relative to current production methods. Now that is a bold goal, and you all play a vital role. And the efforts underway to implement the bioeconomy executive order are in part driven by that recognition that global protein production will need to double by 2050 to feed our growing population. So we know that it's imperative that we invest in complementary systems that can deliver nutrients as quickly and efficiently and deliciously as possible. And we already see that alternative protein development is creating new opportunities for our producers and spurring job creation in rural areas, especially as companies move to commercial scale and locate some of their operations in the heartland. And in fact, I know that according to a recent report by the Climate Works Foundation, the Global Methane Hub, the alternative protein industry could generate up to 83 million jobs by 2050. And we know that there is growing consumer interest across the globe for these products and rising investment across the sector, particularly now in the form of R&D investment from governments all over the world. And USDA is paying close attention. In fact, our scientists and researchers are increasingly supporting the development of the tastiest, safest, and most nutritious alternative proteins possible. We are working with partners to study how to de-risk this industry so it is more sustainable, more scalable, and more marketable. And under the Biden administration, I'm proud to say that USDA has now invested over $37 million in alternative protein R&D, with projects happening all across the United States. That includes over $17 million for research through USDA's National Institute of Food and Agriculture, or NIFA, which, as mentioned, provided the historic $10 million grant funding to Tufts University for the establishment of the first ever National Institute for Cellular Agriculture. In addition to that, USDA has launched a robust portfolio of internal research projects through ARS, the Agricultural Research Service, which we have a couple of scientists here from ARS. Thank you for being here. ARS has invested now more than $20 million since the start of the Biden administration to advance R&D at more than a dozen locations and for at least 18 high-need research projects. Our scientists are developing processes to extract and utilize proteins from plants such as pennycress, millet, and hemp seeds. They're also researching the best methods for protein isolation to achieve optimal functionality, as well as exploring consumer thresholds for off flavors and textures in alternative protein products. ARS, as mentioned, is using machine learning and AI to strengthen the foundations for AI-powered protein and engineering across all of agriculture. And these are just a few examples of how USDA Science Enterprise is supporting the acceleration of this sector. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention on the regulatory front that USDA has made tremendous progress in establishing a fair and transparent path to market for these novel foods. This summer, the Food Safety and Inspection Service issued the first 3 grants of inspection to companies producing cultivated poultry products Upside Foods and Good Meat are now selling chicken cultivated from real animal cells to consumers in the United States. This is a watershed moment for the industry and an exciting preview of the future of food in America. We will build on this milestone by continuing to push the scientific boundaries of possibility for plant-based and for cellular agriculture. We will continue to advance opportunities for U.S. producers to meet the global demand for sustainable proteins, and we'll work on increasing demand for these products through new discoveries that improve their taste, that improve their price, and improve their nutritional value. We will support the biomanufacturing needs of the industry as we look ahead to greater commercial scale production, and we'll work with industry leaders and those of you in the room represented today to harness the power of alternative proteins to create a brighter future for everyone. So thank you again for this incredible recognition. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you, GFI. Next, I am excited to recognize Assemblymember Ash Kalra from California's 25th Assembly District. Assemblymember Kalra has been a trailblazer in the California legislature for alternative proteins. He helped secure $5 million in the budget for alternative protein R&D at 3 University of California schools, UC Davis, UCLA, which I bet is also in the room, maybe, and UC Berkeley. This was the first investment that California made specifically for alternative protein R&D and the largest that any state has made. From this initial investment, UC Labs have already begun to advance exciting work that will help us justify continued investment from the state. The Assemblymember, though, did not stop there. He continued his leadership through the establishment of the Alternative Protein Working Group in the legislature. This working group has engaged Assembly members and senators who are dedicated to supporting the alternative protein industry in California. Through this working group, we have been able to organize and mobilize support for alternative protein from legislators up and down the state. Please join me in recognizing Assemblymember Ash Kalra.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's really amazing to be here, and especially with federal public servants being recognized. It's something that is very meaningful to me, because the work that we're doing collectively is really changing the world, and it's certainly, I think we're going to recognize that 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road when we think back at the Good Food Conference. We think back with the work that's being done by so many of you in this audience. We're going to see lasting impact. And, when I think about what we need to do as a society, I think about the choices I make. I'm the only vegan in the legislature. But I think about that, or the fact that, I'm wearing vegan shoes and all that. The reality is that our individual choices are not by itself going to move the needle on what has to be done. And that's why I'm so appreciative of this particular conference and the work of the Good Food Institute, because we do need systems change. And so, when I first got in the legislature, my first term in 2018, I had the legislature first adopt a resolution recognizing the benefits of plant-based foods. And then over the years, we've had the opportunity as a legislature to start to focus more and more on our food systems, even to the extent where over the last few years we've required plant-based options at our prisons, at our hospitals. We've invested over $100 million for schools to have more nutritious and plant-based options in our schools for our children, and $600 million for infrastructure in our schools, because the kitchens in our schools have been designed for processed foods. And we have to kind of reverse engineer that for our children. But I think what we're seeing now, and certainly under the Biden administration, we're seeing it under the Newsom administration here in California, particularly in terms of combating climate change, is that we're recognizing that we're not going to be able to have any kind of significant change without government being invested and involved and supporting, especially those of you in the private sector who are, really taking a lot of risks in this nascent industry, the academics that are really trying to inspire the next generation of leaders to do the right thing. And so if you look at, for example, the electric vehicle industry, it would not exist the way it does right now without California. And without California investing so many billions of dollars to encourage not just the research, but individual market decisions, and to the point now where people aren't feeling like they're giving up something when they get an electric vehicle. In fact, they're getting a lot in many cases, just like we saw with the solar industry. That's where we have to go with alternative protein, where people recognize they're doing the right thing, but they don't feel like they're giving up anything in terms of quality, in terms of taste. In fact, they'll be getting a lot more than what they're getting right now with our current meat and dairy industry. And so when we look at what we've done as a state, we look at in working with the Good Food Institute, getting $5 million for research at UC Davis, the Alternative Protein Project, the Alternative Meat Lab at Berkeley, resources for a lab at UCLA. Now, $5 million in the whole scheme of things in our food system isn't a whole lot of money. But what it does show, first of all, is that the state's invested. The state believes in this. It signals the market that this is something that the state cares about. And as we've done that in the past, the market usually starts to respond. It also, as I mentioned, inspires a next generation of leaders that are going to school at these UCs that have the opportunity now to learn and to consider what their choices might be in their career moving forward as well. It also has the opportunity to educate. One thing that I do a lot, and again, working with GFI and other organizations, a lot of really great plant-based and cultivated meat companies, is educate my colleagues as to why it's so important for California to not just invest, but to continue to invest and grow our investment. Not only do we have dozens and dozens of companies leading the world here in California, in addition to our research universities, we also have a market that is really, we're becoming the fourth largest economy in the world here in California. And so our market choices make a big difference. I had a bill that banned the little shampoo and conditioner bottles. That's now becoming practice around all of North America, because California alone used to put 500 million of those in hotel rooms and they were not recycled. But when we banned the testing, the sale of cosmetics that tests on animals, that changed the industry internationally. When we banned the sale of fur, that changed the industry internationally. So we know that a state, especially a state the size of California with our economy, that when we make these choices, we have a huge opportunity to change behaviors, to change investment patterns, to change public sentiment. And so getting my colleagues to understand, especially the climate change impacts, as well as the economic impacts, how many jobs we're going to create for their constituents, how much we can grow our economy, it really starts to resonate with so many of my colleagues. So over the years, we've had the opportunity to look at different legislation. One piece of legislation we're still working on with GFI is helping small family farms transition from meat and dairy to plant-based. Because even if plant-based would be more profitable for them, that transition cost is enormous, especially if they've been a legacy cattle rancher or a dairy farmer. Helping that transition is something that I think the state is in a prime position to do. And so we're going to continue to work on that. I have a resolution right now calling on the federal government to sign on to the plant-based treaty internationally. And one of the things that's happened just in the last 5 days, which is huge, is on Thursday we passed SB 253. That bill would require every company with over $1 billion in revenue to actually publicly note and put out there for public consumption Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So not just the direct impact companies have on emissions, but the indirect as well. That means supply chain, value chain, not just whether they have a recycling program or solar panels in the parking lot, but what their actual impact is on emissions. I think that is groundbreaking, and the governor in New York, at Climate Week in New York, just announced he's going to sign that bill. And what that does for the alternative protein industry is huge, because we already know the climate impacts of the meat industry. We already know that 40% of the land in the continental U.S. is used for meat production. And so when those numbers come out, it's going to be a huge boost to alternatives. It's going to be a huge boost, as mentioned, Upside Foods. I had the opportunity to eat, I hadn't eaten chicken in years. And I ate chicken at Upside Foods a few months ago, and it tasted like chicken. And and they're about to open a plant in Illinois to start actually manufacturing to scale. But I think what SB 253 does, it puts us in a position once again as a state to be global leaders, to actually show what corporate impact is happening, what kind of corporate impact and how it's influencing and impacting emissions. And so I'm very excited about the next few years ahead. I think that with all of you in this room, with the brain power, with the passion, with the commitment, with the partnership with the Biden administration, the work here in Sacramento under the Newsom administration, and with the legislative, I got to tell you, our legislative colleagues are fired up on, especially with SB 253 being signed and other environmental measures. We're fired up about doing more and more in the environmental space in combating climate change. But I think that we still have a lot of more room to go in supporting alternative protein research, supporting companies that want to grow here in California, and supporting growing the market of consumers that are looking at plant-based and alternative proteins. And so I'm just so grateful to be part of a community that gets it, part of a community that understands that our current food system is unsustainable and that we need to be aggressive and passionate about moving forward and making sure that all of you are successful in what you're doing. Because if you're all successful, not only is that good for the animals, it's good for the planet, it's good for our health, it's good for everyone. So I wish all of you success, and I'm very grateful for the recognition, but really it's a part of a partnership that we all share together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Assemblymember Collara. Government, of course, plays such an essential role in creating those foundational conditions for the research for an emerging field. And the private sector, of course, is critical in translating innovation into real-world impact. Now, I'm excited to spotlight the role of the scientific community in addressing those technical challenges that currently stand in the way of creating a future where alternative proteins are just as delicious, just as nutritious, just as inexpensive and accessible as conventional animal proteins. By the way, the scientific community is the reason I have no voice right now. Last night's reception felt like a reunion party, and there's so much enthusiasm and excitement in this community. Now, I'm extremely excited that we have Dr. Mark Post with us, and I'll hand over to him in a few minutes to talk about his reflections on the field over the last decade as one of the most inspiring and most visible champions by name in the field. But first, I want to take just a couple moments to lean into the importance of the word community when I say scientific community. We see these brilliant leaders in the spotlight, but they will all be the first to tell you that the folks putting in the long hours at the lab bench or in the pilot plant are all of their research teams and their trainees, hundreds of dedicated scientists standing behind them. So I want to quickly shine a spotlight back on folks that we have here with us at many different career stages who are part of that broader scientific community, and acknowledge how important they are for everything that's happening in this field. So listen up, this will be participatory. If you are an advanced career scientist, so say a PI of an academic lab or someone leading a research team at a company, please stand up and stay standing. Stay on your feet. If you're well along the path in your cultivation as a researcher, so say a PhD student or a postdoc, or you're a scientist or senior scientist or some title like that at a company, or an engineer, please stand up. Stay standing. If you are an early career researcher or engineer and either just starting to work in the alt protein field or aspiring to work in the alt protein field, so I'll also invite anyone who's here as part of our alt protein project student community, please stand up. Thank you so much. You can sit down. When we're talking about building an emerging field, this is what we're talking about. Folks at every level who are learning, teaching, influencing, cross-pollinating ideas across each other. And this is exactly the type of forum where that activity can and should occur. As with all difficult and worthwhile endeavors, it truly takes a village. So with that, I am delighted to hand the mic over to Dr. Mark Post to reflect on the last decade, as well as to share what he anticipates in the decade ahead. Thanks so much, Mark.
Thanks, Liz. This is working. Welcome, everybody. I first want to thank the GFI. 9 years ago, Bruce attended the conference that I organized in Maastricht. And at that time, I had no idea. He was, at that time, I think, directing a team of one. And I had no idea that it would grow to such a tremendous organization, not only in size, but also in impact. And this conference, of course, is a testimony of that. But there are so many influences of GFI, it's unimaginable. So thanks, Bruce, for having set that up. Where are we? This is not my slide. I'm going to talk without slides, if that's okay with you. I have no idea. Right, I'm just going to wing it. So 10 years ago, indeed, we started to, we presented that hamburger in London, and that event was kind of born out of frustration. I think I've told many times this story. And we had no idea that it would spark a enthusiastic crowd like this for a long time to go. And a lot has been achieved in that time. Still a lot has to be done. One of the achievements, of course, is scientific. In the beginning, everything was it started with a scientific endeavor funded by the Dutch government in 2005. And it was a relatively small team, and they were all kind of developing technologies that would, what at that time we called in vitro meat, would lay the foundation for some of the technologies that we're using right now. And if you think about it, what has been achieved in those 10 years, we now have serum-free media, right? In the beginning, everything was with serum. A lot of criticism from everybody in the world. You know, yeah, fine, but why do you use serum to do this? So that was an initial endeavor. It's not rocket science, but it had to be done, and and still to this day, there are still people developing new sera. And I think this will, new media. And I think this will continue for a long time to go. The other thing that has happened is on the level of the cells. We started with primary cells. Now there are, and because at that time there were no, for instance, embryonic stem cells of cows or pigs. They are now available. iPSCs, not available for cows or pigs. They are now available. Immortalized cell lines. So a lot at the cell biology has happened as well. And then, of course, in the scaling up, in the bioprocess, a lot of things happened where initially this was obviously a very, very small scale, and then the traditional ways of scaling up cell culture in bioreactors for the medical field were kind of employed for this particular technology. And now we see a lot of developments in that too, where we hadn't envisioned that, let's say, 10 years ago. And they're also, in making these tissues and making these cell cultures, there are also materials involved. And today I still see a lot of papers being submitted where they use animal proteins that are not replicative and that are being used in the processes to develop cultivated meat. And fortunately, we increasingly see that that is being replaced by new biomaterials that are not animal-derived or are completely synthetic. So a lot of things have happened in that time. And I guess you saw the people who are working on this very hard, very intense. That's one thing I want to say, which I come from the medical field, and the motivation that people have, that researchers have to work in this field and to make this happen is incredible. I've never seen this in the medical field before. It's a whole new level of motivation to work on subjects like cultivated meat. And it's extremely gratifying for somebody like me to see that. Because, that's kind of, we share that passion and that motivation, but that gives an extra energy into making this happen. And don't underestimate how important that is. That's how far we have come. The battle is not over, right? We are just really, in my mind, at the beginning. I said a number of times when I was talking to governments, you need to start funding this, we need to have public funding. This is an endeavor for the next 30 years, not 2030. 2030 is a nice mark on the horizon, but this is an endeavor for the next 30 years. There's still a lot of small things that need to be done. None of these challenges are insurmountable, there are just a lot of them. And you need to work very diligently to make that happen. Things need to become cheaper, scale needs to go up, indeed a lot of training needs to be done, of course. One of the things that there's still a lot of technology development, product development. We see now a number of new products out there. Where cultivated meat is a part of the product. I have the ambition myself to at some point want to see a ribeye steak, a real ribeye steak that you cannot distinguish from the real thing. And that, from a scientific point of view, is a great thing to strive for, but from an industrial point of view is not easy. This will take quite a long time to get there. Yet it's important because for people to recognize that this is a credible alternative for meat, you will need to have these type of products. And they're getting there very small scale and not right where we need to be. And this is really not easy. That's why I have kind of this landmark of 30 years. So I think what has been said here, and it's great to see a number of people from policy here, and to see that in the US and in a lot of other countries in the world, this is receiving public funding. And this, for this 30-year horizon, is absolutely essential, right? Because we see right now, let's not close our eyes for this. We now see a sort of leveling off, if not declining, interest from the private sector in investing in this. Of the 156 companies that were there maybe a year ago, we now see a couple of companies also folding because they cannot get additional funding. So we are really at a critical stage now where we need to increase our support, we need to increase our effort, and also increase our pressure on governments and public funding to continue this funding. So for 2030, again, for me, that's a very short period of time. You cannot do a whole lot in, at least scientifically, in 6 or 7 years. Still, a lot needs to happen from the technology part, from the bioprocess part, but also cost. One of the challenges here for scaling up, for instance, is, and I never really realized that because I never was involved in scaling up, is that we have this catch-22 between cost of goods and scaling up, right? It's very obvious in, for instance, the growth factor market. It's very nice to see that we now have 30, 40 companies getting into this market, starting to grow or to make recombinant growth factors, but they're still at a relatively high price. And once they scale up, that price will come down. When we talked to one of the big manufacturers of recombinant protein in food many, many years ago, they said, oh yeah, we can make this for $10 per gram, but then you need to buy like 1,000 kilos. Well, 1,000 kilos last me until, a couple of centuries from now. So that's kind of the catch. They are waiting for scaling up their production for us to provide the demand. We are waiting for them to provide the very cheap growth factors. And it's all doable, but you have to bridge that gap between waiting for each other to scale. So that's one of the problems that we need to overcome, and I'm sure it can be done, and we gradually see this happening, but I would love to see this go a lot faster, because then we can scale up a lot faster. And there are also still a number of real fundamental technology issues. One of the things that keeps me awake, there are not that many things that keep me awake, but one of the things that keep me awake is, can we actually get to the quality of these tissues outside of the cow or the pig or the chicken, to the quality of these tissues so that future consumers cannot really make a distinction anymore, cannot really recognize this as being cultured. This may be somewhat overambitious from me, but I think that's what we have to strive for. It's great to see now that there are products out there where animal cells are added as an ingredient, and they do add value to the product. But I think to become really a credible alternative for the larger population, we need to do better than that. And that's not a trivial challenge. We can get there. We have seen also, I've seen personally in the last couple of years, a lot of improvement in, for instance, muscle protein and fatty acids in the fat products, where for the fatty acids, it's no longer distinguishable from fat from the animal anymore. For the animal proteins, it's still somewhat off, and it's hard to do. So I keep telling internally we are not being disrespectful to Woody Allen, but we are kind of making Woody Allen muscles instead of Arnold Schwarzenegger muscles. And we eventually need to get better at this. So a lot of challenges. It's also a lot of fun, actually, to work on this. As a scientist, I'm really intrigued by this. And as I mentioned, I have big ambitions. And I think we all need to have that ambition. We're not there yet. 2030 is a spot on the horizon. But please look further than that and share that ambition with us. And please also keep on having that same motivation that has been so great for the last 10 years, and keep that up for the next 25 or 30 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Congratulations on all that you've accomplished in the last decade, and we all look forward to seeing what the next one and beyond hold. So good morning, everyone. I'm Caroline Bushnell, the Senior Vice President of our Corporate Engagement team. So my colleagues and this morning's speakers brilliantly demonstrated the critical role of policy and scientific research in accelerating alternative proteins and moving us towards a more sustainable, secure, and just protein supply. As Jessica said, ensuring consumer adoption of alternative proteins will be essential to realizing the many benefits that this sector can provide. And those who are working across the private sector, including the innovators, entrepreneurs, investors, and business leaders in this audience, are helping to build the brands and the products that will ensure alternative proteins do not remain alternative. These folks are consistently innovating to provide consumers with alternative protein options that are just as tasty, affordable, and accessible as the conventional ones. As Mark said, we need to innovate at a level not often seen. And when you need to innovate, you need to collaborate. While the potential of alternative proteins is incredibly exciting and promising, success is not inevitable. An effective collaboration to organize and accelerate the industry is going to be critical to seizing the opportunity that alternative proteins present. And there are many groups here doing just that, from sharing best practices, open sourcing critical data and insights, aligning on category messaging and nomenclature, advocating for a fair regulatory playing field, and so much more. So I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the US-based consortia in the room that are supporting the alternative protein sector. If you are a member of any of these groups, when you hear your organization named, please do stand up as I call them out. Alongside these groups, there are of course many others doing critical work, so I apologize if I don't mention an initiative you are a part of. So with that, I'd like to recognize AMPS Innovation, the Precision Fermentation Alliance, stand up, yep, the Fungi Protein Association, the Plant-Based Foods Association, the Alliance for Plant-Based Inclusion, Tufts University Center for Cellular Agriculture Consortium, the Cultivated Meat Modeling Consortium, the Purdue Initiative on Convergent Manufacturing for Agriculture and Food Equity, ICAFE, and the University of Minnesota's Plant Protein Innovation Center. So thank you all for all that you do to support the alternative protein sector. You can sit down now, thank you. And there are, of course, many other international alliances that have joined forces to help reimagine protein and are doing critical work. There's too many to comprehensively name, but we thank you all. This is truly a team effort, and we're so grateful to be in it with you all.
Wow, what an incredible set of champions on the stage, and wow to all the folks in this room today. Now, one champion you'll notice we didn't name here, but I want to acknowledge, is all the donors, the philanthropists, the investors, the funders who make GFI's work possible and who make all of this work possible, who provide the patient capital, who provide the investments to startups and innovators, and who help spaces like this and all of GFI's work around the world. So thank you. You know who you are, the funders, the donors, the investors who support this sector thriving all across the world.